Welcome to Voices Storytelling. My name is Debbie Burtnett, and I'm the president of the Hoover Historical Society. This gathering is presented by the Hoover Historical Society and hosted here at the First Christian Church in Birmingham, and we want to thank Beth Thomason and her folks for all the support in this beautiful venue. Today, we are doing something people have done for thousands of years. We're telling stories. Not famous stories, not movie stories, real life stories. Stories about adventures, mistakes, lessons learned, and the kind of moments that make life interesting. Our Master of Ceremonies has done a little bit of everything short of landing on the moon, and I wouldn't rule that out either. Jim Langley grew up in Vernon, Alabama, earned degrees in political science and public administration, became a distinguished military graduate, and served his country from Alaska to Korea before retiring as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. In civilian life, he worked in communications, business, and community service, but retirement is where he really got dangerous. He turned into a writer, artist, tour guide, storyteller, and unofficial Hoover historian. Jim has written books on Hoover history, Alabama sayings, and even Oak Hill Cemetery, which means he's one of the few people who can make graveyards entertaining. He's led countless historical tours, served as president of the Hoover Historical Society, and won Hoover's Freedom Award in 2021. Please welcome the man who proves history doesn't have to be dusty, Jim Langley.
Thank you, Debbie. I really appreciate the turnout. I thought with all this nice weather, you might be out doing something else, but it's good to see you. As they say, my grandfather said, always say that because it's always better to be seen than viewed, right? And I'm to that point. Every morning I get up above looking at the right side of the grass, I'm good. So again, welcome and thank all of you who helped put this together. And most of you, how many people are kind of like tired of hearing about AI? You know, I like AI, but it's in the news all the time. But the original form of communication is what all the history was based on in the whole world. People telling other people's stories, and I don't mean the stories like your mama whooped you for. You know, when I was growing up, if you told a story, it was a fib. So, you know, but we're telling them real life stories. So we're going to get to several things today. And how many of you, I kind of think the younger folks, real younger folks, lost some things because when I was growing up out in the country, the boonies, all my old folks didn't have TVs or anything, maybe they had a radio. So when we'd go over to Aunt Nettie's and Uncle Ad's, or we'd go over to Uncle Dempsey and Aunt Beaner's, instead of watching TV, they sat around and told stories. Now, the best ones were the ghost stories. I really believe those. They would tell those right along, but then they'd start telling stories about themselves, about the uncle, the aunt, you know, whatever, and all the good stories, juicy stories that they had growing up. So I was always really interested in stories and people's lives. And today, you know, we're not going to try to tell you like David said, a TV story. We're just going to try to tell you some stories that we remember from our past that we think and that may have hung with us for a while. And one of the stories that we tell, you know, when we were back in the old days, we used to go to every holiday, we would have a get-together with the whole family. And I had about 30 cousins, so we'd all get together, and it was a madhouse. But one thing that back then, there were division between my cousins and uncles. That sounds familiar. There were some differences in opinion about things. And you'd think you had to choose one side or the other. Now, when I say that, you're thinking Auburn, Alabama. But it wasn't Auburn, Alabama necessarily, even though that might have been one thing. But North Alabama, we're probably one-sided in that respect. But what back then, the decision you had to make, were you a Ford person or a Chevrolet person? And when you got the family together, I had an uncle, both of them were in the car dealership business. One of them was a Ford guy, one of them was a Chevrolet guy. And they were getting in fusses. Well, which radio sounds best? Does the gear shift smoothly? You know, I like the new seats. The engine's bigger, more power. I can get to the Dairy Queen faster than you can get there. So there was a lot of discussion and back and forth, and it was sometimes got pretty heated. You know, if somebody says something wrong, it would get off track and get heated. So the stories will go back and forth, but there was one story that just a short story I'm going to tell you today about an incident. It's one of those stories that every time we got together, somebody would say, "How about when Uncle Willie did this?" So I'm going to tell you that story now, and it's about the cars. And my Uncle Willie, he was there he is. My Uncle Willie was a great man. He was, as you see here, it was in his 80s. He loved to go down to the store and buy penny candy, and he'd put them in a sack, and he'd take it. When all the kids would come by, he would give us this same kind of little square candy. Some of it was yellow and red and stuff. You know, penny candy you got at the store. After a while, we kids wanted a little more, but he always just had us penny candy. So he would come about everywhere we go. Now he, as you see, you can't see it entire, but he was in his 80s at the time when I was at home, and he had a old brown hat with stains of sweat up to halfway. He had the biggest ears you'd ever want to see, and he had these bushy eyebrows that went all across there, and his eyes kind of squinted real blue out of those bushy eyebrows. And he always had a pair of overalls on. And sometimes my grandmother really got on to him because he didn't wash those overalls very often. They probably could stand on their own. And he wore those Brogan shoes. So he was a good old guy, but he was as sweet a man as you'd ever seen. He was a lifelong bachelor. You don't hear that much anymore, but he and his brothers were farmers, and they farmed, and both his brothers passed on, and he moved into my house with my grandfather and grandmother McGill. So that was kind of the trio I said I had with my grandparents. I didn't have any other grandparents, but I had Grandma McGill, Granddaddy McGill, and Uncle Willie. And they were just, they held everything. Now, Grandma McGill and Grandpa McGill were high-tempered. You know, my granddaddy would get mad, and he was real nervous, and he'd start chewing his thumb like that. And my grandma, she was real outspoken, and she would basically tell him what for, and they would get in a real knockdown argument, not hitting, but just argue at each other. Uncle Willie would come in and say, "Now y'all hush now, there's no arguing about that. It doesn't matter about that. Just get on with it." So Uncle Ad was the guy that calmed everybody down. And so he, one day, my Uncle Junior, who was a Chevrolet aficionado, he brought a brand new 1959 Chevrolet Impala. It was yellow with a green top. Now the back looks like a Batman fin. It was about, we call them land yachts. It was about half a block long. And the back had the tail lights were like two little eyes, sticking out. So most of it, some of you remember that. And they had, the only thing about it is they used a lot of gas. So he couldn't brag about gas mileage. But he had that new car, and he went down to Grandma's, Granddaddy's, in that new car, and the kids were out in the yard, and Uncle Willie was sitting on the front porch. Now, he always sat on the front porch or the back porch. In the morning, when the shade was out back, he sat on the back porch, leaned his chair up against the wall. Now, he liked to whittle, and his main thing was he would whittle and make cigar box violins, fiddles. He would get a cigar box, a stick that he whittled, and some bought strings, and he would make a fiddle out of it. And he was also a philosopher, and he also was a pipe smoker. So he'd sit out there all day. We don't know. We never knew him when he worked. So he just sat out there all day and just talked. And he was a philosopher, of course, was his. When he got to past lunch, he would go out to the front where the shade was and sit on the porch, which was a shop we had up there with him just leaning back on the porch, smoking his pipe all day. So that's what he did all day. But so when they drove up, and Junior drove up, and he called him JR. When JR drove up in his new 59 Chevrolet, he come up to the porch and said, he was real, had his chest all puffed up and was talking about his new car out there. Y'all see that new car? That's a good one. And everybody said, yeah, I like that car. That's a pretty car. He said, well, Uncle Willie said, why don't you be the first one of the family to ride in this new car? Said, we'll let you ride. We'll take you up to the store so you can buy some candy. And Uncle Willie said, well, if it'll get me there, I guess I'll ride in the old car. So he got his walking stick and was walking on down to the car, and us kids piled in the back seat. And so they got in the car, and here come Uncle Willie down. And Junior got in to crank the car. Uncle Willie came up to the side. He said, well, fine car. It's sure to get us there. He opened the door. He opened it to the full extent of the law out here. And then he slammed it as hard as he could to the window screen. Junior just went, Willie, you don't have to slam that car door so hard. It'll close it on its own. It's a new car. He said, well, I'm used to it. I don't want to fall out, so I got to make sure it's closed. And so kids in the back kind of grinning. So then Junior cranked the car and put it in drive, and they started out the gravel road toward pavement. And Uncle Willie always had this pipe in his overalls, and so he pulled out, and that's probably a corn cob, but pulled out his pipe, packed it in an old North State tobacco, the one with a little in the sack with a yellow string. I don't know if any of you remember that. And he packed that tobacco in his pipe, and Junior was already getting ready to drive on, but he said, Willie said, can I give you a light? Uncle Willie said, no, I don't think I need a light. So he turned his attention away. Uncle Willie, about that time, reached in his pocket and pulled out a box of Fire Chief matches. And so at that point, he put his pipe in his mouth, and he got the match open. Now, there's a little striker thing on the matchbox you can strike it on. But Uncle Willie didn't do that. He took a match out, one of those matches, and he reached over on this dash. And before Junior could say, Uncle Willie, don't do that, there was a little explosion and a sulfur smell where he scratched that new Chevrolet Impala all the way across the stud. He got it lit, and then he said, Uncle Willie said, this is a new car. Why'd you do that? He said, well, cars are just to get you places. They ain't worth too much to do. So, so it'll wipe off. Don't worry about it. It'll wipe off. So anyway, he branded the car for the rest of its life. Now, on the way on to town, the kids in the back were laughing. Junior was sitting there. You couldn't tell if he was about to go ghost or have a heart attack or whatever. He just couldn't even speak for a long time. But then all the kids kept on laughing and kidding around. Finally, Junior got on with the program and realized, hey, this car, it's going to be in the junkyard one day, and it may be scrap metal one day, but Uncle Willie's going to be around in my life, and his story's going to live forever. And we're going to be telling this story every time we get together. So that is the moral of the story is people are more important than things. Don't worry about possessions. Okay. Our next storyteller is Kathy Long. She's a former Auburn cheerleader. She spent so many years at the Hoover High School that some students thought she was part of the part of the building blueprint. Kathy Reese Long devoted her life to education, teaching everything from elementary PE to college classes, and eventually serving 17 years, I think, as assistant principal at Hoover High School. Basically, if it was happening at Hoover High, Kathy probably had a clipboard and knew all about what was going on. She says her favorite part of being assistant principal was working with teachers, encouraging students, and helping the school grow. Now, she did a good job because an assistant principals, if I remember, a lot of responsibility was discipline. And she must have done a good job because I noticed when her former students hear her name, they all straighten up real fast. And so after all these years, she says she enjoys sitting in seats that aren't behind a desk or in a bleacher. Today, instead of handing out tardy slips, she's handing us a story. Please welcome educator, mentor, and Hoover legend, Kathy Long.
I walk with a cane, so if I look like I'm stumbling, I'm, as the people who fly on trapezes say, I'm working today without a net and got my cane with me. I think we've got a pretty mixed group of people here today, and it is great to see some faces that I recognize, and first ran into a lady with a storytelling t-shirt on. I thought, oh, she's a professional. She's bought her a t-shirt when she went somewhere. I think I want to start first by seeing if we have anything in common in this room. How many of you have been to school? See there, I got them connected just like that. That's wonderful. Okay, everybody's been to a school. And I was an assistant principal. Jim's already told you what they do mostly. They do discipline. And but I bet there's one thing that we don't have in common in this room. I love teenagers. I'm seeing some hands up, and I'm seeing some thumbs down. I understand that. Teenagers are great. They're unique. They are problem solvers. They are creative, and they are, Jim, I did have to have some notes today. I'm sorry. The old brain cells aren't functioning like they used to. And for 30-something years, I did work with discipline. I was an assistant principal, and a term you don't hear very much, I was a career assistant principal, which means that's all I wanted to do. I loved working with the kids and working with the teachers. That's why I was in the school. I didn't much want to be a principal. I had a little short stint at that, but I'm not good at budgets or talking to the mayor or having the superintendent drop into an office. I'd much rather have a student drop in. But I'm glad through all that discipline that I might have been one of the ones who understood about teenagers, and that is that they're going to make mistakes. They're silly. They don't understand sometime when they do something wrong. And they're going to make bad choices. And one time when I was teaching, I've got a couple of stories in my story. A whole group of kids made a bad choice. They decided during the night sometime, we don't know how, they're going to unload a bucket of crickets in the administrative offices. And they came through my window. So I had the most crickets in my office. And when I walked in that morning, I was the first one there, and all I heard was this buzzing in my office, and I thought, oh, Lord, it's crickets. And I knew immediately they've let out crickets. I thought they were all over the school. So I'd go to the custodial closet, and I'd grab me a broom, and I'd grab me a dustpan and a bucket, and I'd go back in my office, and I don't know what I was thinking. I thought, I'm going to sweep all these crickets, and went for the high flyers and was hitting them down and sweeping them all up and getting them and trying to put them in a bucket, and then they'd get out. I saw a teacher pass by. I said, come hold this broom for me, and I'm still going. Finally, Mr. Godwin, our beloved principal, walked past my office and said, I'm going to call the exterminator. Get up. So I got up. But I think that's why I've got problems with my back. To this day, I'm having to use a cane. I wonder if my insurance would have taken maybe something like if they had grasshopper for workman's comp. I would have to write up a whole story about that. But I've got to go to the doctor this week. I'm going to get an epidural. And I'm going to say it's because of crickets. So these teenagers do silly things. And I'm really proud and I'm really glad that I got to be one of the ones in their lives who tried to show them and let them know that they could do better. And that I believed in them, and they didn't realize it, but a lot of other people believed in them too. And our teachers, I loved working with them. They were pros. I mean, they looked at lesson plan books they should be in the Smithsonian. They were color-coded. They had purple for the study guides, green for the test. One teacher, Carla Slavinsky, every time I checked her lesson plans, she just made me so proud. It was like Carla was the only lesson plan book in the school. And I gave the teachers stickers on their lesson plan books. Way to go. Atta girl. This is great. And at first, they kind of started talking about it in the lounge. So one of them said, I hear you're giving stickers. I didn't get a sticker. I said, well, you're going to have to work harder. Give me a better lesson plan. But one of the things that topped most everything that went on when I was at Hoover High School was that it was in my area kind of having to take up things. We called it confiscate. I have had to confiscate skateboards. I've had to confiscate cigarettes. I've had to confiscate some things I'm not going to tell you that I had to confiscate. One time, I had to confiscate a tongue ring. A tongue ring. It was in the handbook. No tongue rings. So the teacher, I've only got 2 minutes. Okay, I better hurry. Anyway, I got some paper towels, went to the bathroom, got paper towels, put them right on top of my hand, and went to the classroom where the tongue ring was, and I called the girl out in the office, and I said, I think you've got a tongue ring. Well, yes, ma'am, I didn't know Dad couldn't wear it to school. Well, no, you can't go to school. So take it out. So she took it out, put it on top of my paper towels, and I walked. She said, am I going to get that back? I said, no, you're not going to get it back. And I walked to the stairwell, the nearest trash can. And before I wadded it up to throw away, I thought, this is what I do for a living? And I wadded up and threw it away. But there was one thing. Homecoming week. Y'all remember homecoming week? Every day's a dress-up day. They have hat day, they have twin day, they have beach day. One day during homecoming week on beach day, I'm sitting in my office. I go out to the front hall like I always did in the mornings, and I'm standing looking around. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And I hear a commotion over here down on B Hall. A whole bunch of somebody had just come in the front door, and I look over there and I see, we'll make his name Johnny. And I see Johnny, shoulders back, walking straight and proud. He looked like he was going into a photo shoot. There he was, wearing this. My friends, Johnny was a football player. He was a big boy. This is what you call a Speedo. So I knew that this was going to have to be mine at the end of the day. And I told him, I said, I'm going to keep it. I'm going to wash it. Because one Sunday, I'm going to be telling a story in my church. And I'm going to pull your Speedo out and show everybody what a crazy decision you made. So he kind of walks back to the office with me. The girls are fainting. The boys are laughing. Come on, we walk back. He comes in my office and he sits down. And you learn real quickly when you're doing discipline, you don't ever ask, Janet, why did you do that? Because they don't know. They're teenagers. They're missing a part of the brain. That's the truth. That's a scientific fact I just made up. There's a little bitty part of the brain, and it's not developed in teenagers. Rosemary, you know that's true. That is for true. I've got to end. Okay, so I just want to tell you, everybody wants to know what happened to Johnny. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. But I'm going to tell you that all of you have stories to tell, whether it's a speeding ticket or Speedo. So tell your story, because someday you might not remember it. Thank you. God bless you all.
Right. Our next speaker, Joe Limbaugh. He was raised in a small village in central Illinois. He began his 42-year career in industrial distribution after moving to the south suburbs of Chicago at age 17. That sounds like an adventure to me. His career eventually brought him to Birmingham through his leadership with Motion Industries. Along the way, Joe and his wife Joyce restored 10 homes, maybe more, including several historic properties, while raising 3 daughters and spoiling 6 grandchildren and a miniature schnauzer. He's an artist, a preservationist, and a natural storyteller. Joe still enjoys climbing into a tractor or a combine back home in Illinois just for fun. And please welcome Joe Limbaugh.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. I'm really excited today to tell you a story about one of my favorite foods that, oddly enough, is linked to the most significant events of my life. I turned 60 in December, and throughout my life, this food has played a role in it, and it's the lemon. I love the lemon for several reasons. One, the color. There's something about the sunshiny yellow color that makes me happy. There's the lemony scent. Who doesn't love that? But really, it's the taste. A squeeze of lemon over seafood, and then the desserts. One of my favorite desserts, lemon squares with powdered sugar over the top of it. But did you know that lemons also have a dark side? Lemons produce something called citric acid, and in large concentrations can not only cause skin irritation, they can cause blindness. There's also a law called the lemon law, named after the lemon, which provides a legal remedy in the unlikely event you buy a motor vehicle that doesn't perform as standards. You can proceed against the company legally under the lemon law. And then there's the saying that my grandmother once said to me. I was grousing about something very, very young. I'm sure it was very insignificant to her. And she said, well, honey, life hands everybody a lemon from time to time. It's up to you whether you use that lemon to make lemonade or citric acid. And so I've thought about that throughout my life. Well, when I was very young, life handed me a little bit of a lemon, and whether it was because I was learning English at the same time that my mother was or some other reasons, by the time I got to grade school, I had a speech impediment, and it was determined that I would undergo a course of speech therapy. Now, to a first grader, hearing that you're going to do something called speech therapy is not appealing at all. But then I learned that that was going to occur at the second recess in the afternoon, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of every week of my first grade year. So I would be missing that time out on the playground. Needless to say, I was not pleased. Now, all of this takes place in a small village called Onarga. It will make sense to you if I spell it. It's Onarga, Onarga, Illinois. Population at the time was around 1,300. Onarga rests on the far western edge of Iroquois County, Illinois, so named after the Iroquois Indians who settled that area many, many years ago. And like the current inhabitants, they were peaceful farmers, agricultural. In fact, the land there is very flat. And when I say flat, I mean flat as the floor, not the carpeted part because that's got texture to it. The tile part where your feet are resting, it's that flat. And there's a certain austerity, simplicity, modesty. You can substitute whatever word you want for what it's like to live in that area. There's nothing fancy about it, and there can't be because there's no critical mass for commercial anything. There are no real high-paying jobs. Everything is either agricultural or supports the agricultural industry. So people there grow their own vegetables, paint their own houses, do their own laundry, wash their own cars. It's a really lovely place to grow up. And if the towns like Onarga are austere, the school systems are no exception. In fact, where I went to grade school, the building that I went to was the oldest public school still in use in the state of Illinois, and it was constructed in 1857. It was a fascinating brick edifice in my mind's eye, Romanesque style, dark brick. It had large double-hung, multi-pane windows that raised and lowered. We would still use them. And in the front of the building, there was a turret that rose above the roof line. It had a witch's cap roof, but it was open air, and from it there was a large cast iron bell. Connected to a bell was a thick marine rope that through a series of pulleys and hidden chambers worked its way down to the first floor, where our custodian, Mr. Meyer, would ring the bell, signifying the beginning of class. And you could hear the bell chiming across all the brick streets. It was just a wonderful building. Now, we did not have air conditioning in that building. You don't really need it in that part of the country, but we did have heat. And the heat was a wonderful radiant heat. If you've never seen cast iron radiators, about this tall, and they lined the exterior walls inside the building underneath all of the windows. And when we would come in from recess during winter, having played in the snow, which we did, and we walked to school in the snow, we didn't do it barefooted, we had boots. You would come in from recess and you would put your hats and scarves and everything across the top, and it would dry them and warm them and make them nice and toasty for your walk home. So it was a wonderful heating system and a wonderful old building. Now, I remember the first time I met my speech therapist, and I was introduced to her, and her name was, and you can't make this up, Miss Spittler. And so here I was skipping recess to go meet with somebody called Miss Spittler. So anyway, I was conducted to her room, which was a part of the building I had never been into. And her office wasn't much more than a very large closet, but it had one of those fabulous double-hung windows behind it. And there was a desk, a bookcase, a chair for Miss Spittler, and a chair for me, and that was it. Now, Miss Spittler was all business. As I remember her, everything was just get to work and make things happen. And with the benefit of hindsight, I realized it was because she was a regional therapist, and she probably had come from someplace at great lengths and was going someplace afterwards. So we had to get to business and get out of there. She had the same tools with her every time. There was an old phonograph that she carried with her where we would listen to records of letters and words being pronounced correctly over and over and over and over. She had a flip chart with all the letters of the alphabet, kind of a tent type, and you would flip to the certain letter that you were studying that day, and you would see cutaways of your mouth where your tongue works according to your teeth and so forth and so on. Then she had a spool of white butcher string. She would cut a length of it off, tie it to the tip of my tongue, and move it around when I was trying to speak. And then there were the marbles, and this is the one I never really understood and how it really worked, but she had a jar of marbles, and she would hold my chin, and I would open my mouth, and she would drop marbles in until it was about full. And every now and then she would go, "Not to worry, sweetie, if you swallow one, it'll pass." And on at least one occasion, I know she was right. And so it went, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, afternoons, me and Miss Spittler going through the drill. I also remember the last day I saw Miss Spittler, it was springtime in Illinois, and springtime in Illinois, particularly this part of the country, can be described in one word. It's glorious. The winters there are cold, dark, snowy. Early spring, cold, dark, wet. But by the time late spring comes, the wind shifts from the north and starts heading south, and things warm up, and then things bloom everywhere. It starts with the daffodils, the tulips. But in Onarga, it seemed that every yard had lilac bushes, and you could smell lilacs everywhere. That particular day, the window was open, and Miss Spittler sat there. And all of her implements, the record player, the string, all of that was gone. It was just her, and I sat down, and she said, "Well, Joe, we've done all we can do together. You know, you've done a great job, but there are things I want you to remember. Speech impediments don't really go away. They're always lurking in the background. So if you're tired, fatigued, that may come to the surface." And she said, "People will judge you by the words you use and how you speak. And so it's very important for you to understand that you got to keep working on this." And that was it. And so I went back out to the playground that afternoon and, quite frankly, forgot about Miss Spittler for many, many years. However, back to the lemon. When I think about all the significant things that happened because of that, it's truly remarkable. For instance, my first real job that wasn't doing field work was a company that I worked with for 43 years, or just under 43 years. And I was hired because the hiring manager liked the way I spoke and believed that I could work up into inside sales someday, be on the phones and maybe move beyond that, which I did. And it was because of that job that I would answer the phone, and there was a certain young lady that would call. And I would engage her socially. You might substitute the word flirt. And this fall, we will be married 39 years. Throughout my career, thank you. Throughout my career, I've had a chance to do a lot of public speaking as COO of the company that I worked into. We would take over the Gaylord property and do national sales meetings. We would bring 5,000 people in. I would not only MC those events, but present technical information to them. And it was the confidence to do that, the confidence to do community theater, the confidence that I have here today standing in front of you, all because of this. So in closing, it's my sincerest wish for all of you that only on occasion, life hands you a lemon, and you take that lemon and make yourselves a nice cool glass of lemonade. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker has traveled a long road to get here today, and I mean that literally. In 2015, Ed Spencer finally completed the entire 2,163-mile Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine. Most of us get tired from walking from the parking lot to the buffet line, but and I can go there. But I can't imagine how hard that was. Ed was born in Atlanta and raised in Birmingham. His dad started Spencer Furniture, which was in Birmingham and Bessemer. And so they were long lives. He went to Auburn, graduated from Auburn, then went off to seminary where he met the love of his life, Mary Pat, who we'll meet later. He served in churches in Mobile, Little Rock, Sarasota, Birmingham, and as co-pastor with her. He was a counselor, a backpacker, a runner, and apparently a part-time saint to some people. Now, here's the part I like best. Ed also performs magic in his retirement for children at Children's Hospital. So if tonight's story suddenly disappears halfway through, don't panic. It may just be part of his act. Please give a warm welcome to minister, magician, runner, mountain climber, and master storyteller, Ed Spencer.
Thank you, Jim. It is great to be back in this wonderful church. This is the last church that I served in ministry, along with my wife, Mary Pat. And after 52 years of ministry, I decided to find a new ministry, and that was to be a volunteer at Children's of Alabama Hospital. I volunteered to be a magician there and to take magic to those children who are very sick and give them moments of joy and laughter in their rooms. I've been doing magic all my life. It's a big hobby of mine. I've done magic at churches, at schools, all over the place. And now I have the opportunity to go and do magic at Children's of Alabama. So twice a week, I would drive down to the south side of Birmingham, enter the parking deck, go up to the top floor, gather up my magic tricks in a bag and take them down to the door to the hospital. And there by the front door of the hospital are little red wagons that the parents can use to take their items for their child into their rooms. Teddy bears, toys, pictures, clothing. I took a red wagon and placed my magic tricks in the wagon and went inside the hospital to the lobby. And there I met other volunteers who were clowns for ministry. We hugged each other. And then we went up to the 8th floor, the cancer floor for little children, went to the nurse's station and asked the nurse, are there any children on the floor that would like to have a visit from a magician and from some clowns? And she would take a piece of paper and write down the rooms where the children are. And so we'd walk down the hall to a room, and we would gently knock on the door and open the door and say, would you like to have a clown visit or a magician today? And most of the time, the parents and the child would say yes. And we'd go into the room, and the room is decorated with stuffed teddy bears and pictures of rainbows and pictures of trees and flowers and toys. And there in the bed would be the patient, the little child. And over on the couch by the window would be the two parents. And the clowns would do their silly skits and tell their funny jokes. And then it was time for me to do some magic. And I brought along the favorite magic trick of children at Children's Hospital, and that is the magic coloring book. I need your help for this magic trick this afternoon. Begin thinking of your I want you to be thinking of your favorite color in your mind. This coloring together. And you can see in our magic coloring book, we have some pictures. One day I had finished this trick, and all of a sudden, little Carol, 6 years old, in the bed with cancer, points toward the window. Now remember, we're 8 floors up, and in the window was a man dressed in red. Outside the window, dressed in red. And Carol knew who he was. Spider-Man! It's Spider-Man! It's Spider-Man! You see, at Children's, ever so often, the window washers would dress as action heroes like Spider-Man and Batman and Superman and lower themselves down to each floor to wave to the children. Carol was so excited, screaming and laughing, full of joy. And she gets out of her bed and she walks slowly over, pulling behind all her IVs, and she goes to the window and she puts her hand up on the window, and Spider-Man puts his hand next to hers, and they touch each other. And she says, Spider-Man, I love you. It was an aha moment. It was wonderful. Wonderful. This little child of God having that moment of joy and excitement and laughter of reaching out and touching Spider-Man. The time came for Spider-Man to lower himself down to the next floor, to the 7th floor, and see the child there and wave to him or her. And so he waved goodbye and blew her a kiss, lowered himself down, and Carol walked back to her bed, still excited, laughing, full of joy. We talked some more and did some more skits and some more magic. It's time to go. We went over to her bed and said, Carol, we have to leave now. And she said, you know what? This Saturday is my birthday, and I'll be 7 years old. And the clowns and myself all said, happy birthday, Carol. Happy birthday. And we sang happy birthday to her. And then she said this. She said, yes, this Saturday is my birthday. And next week, I'm going to see Jesus. At Children's, we are not allowed to touch the children. But I wanted to hold her and squeeze her so bad. But my heart went out to her. We left the room, and I was walking down the hallway. We were all very quiet, full of emotion. And I thought to myself, and this is where the minister part of me comes in, I thought to myself, if I was in that room, in that bed, and Almighty God was at the window, would I be as excited and as full of joy as Carol was to see Spider-Man? And would I go over and touch the window and say, God, I love you? And the second thing would be this. Do I have the faith, like Carol, that someday I would see Jesus? You know, the Lord had it right in his story when he said, let the children come to me, for to them belongs the kingdom of God.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for your service. That's a good thing you're doing. We're going to take a 10-minute bathroom break, so be back in your seats in about 10. Okay, everyone give Mark Swindoll a hand for coming and helping entertain us. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Okay, thanks everybody for hanging around, and we're going to have a good second half here. Our next storyteller has lived enough lives for at least 3 people. He's picked cotton by hand. I've done that. He's flown a supersonic fighter jet. He's preached sermons. He's coached championship teams. He's swept floors. He's managed millions of dollars. And he served 16 years in the Georgia legislature and was one time Georgia's legislator of the year. Most of us I kind of get a nap and get tired just hearing all that. It kind of puts me, that's too much. He served as pastor of Hillcrest United Methodist Church in LaGrange, Georgia, and somewhere along the line learned one of life's greatest truths. Whether you're in a fighter jet or a church fellowship, somebody wants to change the temperature. He and his wife, Debbie, raised 2 children, collected 7 grandchildren, and built a life grounded in faith, family, and perseverance. He says he's about as ordinary as you can get, which is exactly what kind of thing a man says after flying supersonic aircraft and serving a state government job. Please give a warm welcome to storyteller, pastor, pilot, coach, and public servant, Randy Nix.
My first season as a baseball coach was a very unique experience. While most of the teams in the league that I was in had a sponsor with some kind of a macho name, like Big Bob Steel Erectors, my sponsor was a local dentist by the name of Sammy Cousins. And the logo that we had on our uniforms was the little happy tooth that the Dental Association provides. Now, that's kind of cute. It makes you want to laugh, but it caused some problems because the other kids want to call my kids the tooth fairies. Well, see, we didn't have coach pitch baseball in Slap-Out, Alabama, where we live. So I had to take my son, Jess, who happens to be here today, to Wetumpka to sign up so we could play in their league. So we went to Wetumpka, and we got him signed up. And just like it is with most all youth sports, they didn't have enough coaches. So they asked me if I would take a team. And I said, yeah, I'll take a team. So we got everybody all signed up. And then they started talking about the draft. Now, you know, drafting kids to play baseball when they're mostly 7 and 8 years old is not a big deal, right? Wrong. You see, the other coaches there had known these kids from the day they were born, and they knew exactly who they wanted to draft. They had a list of every one of them they wanted to pick, and I didn't know any of them. The only one I knew was my son. So all I could do is go while they did their tryouts, and I watched them throw a few balls, try to catch a few balls, and try to hit a few balls. Then I did the best I could on picking my team. And I probably got the equivalent of maybe 3 pretty good third-round draft picks. I had a couple of kids that were real good baseball players that the other coaches didn't know and had overlooked. I had a couple of pairs of brothers. If you pick one brother, you automatically get the other brother. And then I had a couple of kids that didn't make it to the draft. One of them in particular didn't even show up for the draft, and they assigned into my team. So as I looked around at everybody else, we looked a little bit shaky, but we got busy and we started practicing. And I told my kids, I said, look, all I want you to do is I want you to come to practice. I want you to listen to what I say. And I want you to know that if you do all that and give it your best, you will be winners. So we practiced hard, and I'll have to admit, for that age group, we practiced way too much and way too long, but we got better. Now, we didn't have a lot of skill, but we had a great attitude. So finally, we got a chance to start the season. And we were going to get to play those coaches that thought they drafted so good and those teams that were so good. We had 7 teams in the league, so the deal was we would play each team 6 times, so we'd have a 12-game season. Well, lo and behold, in the middle of the season, Dr. Cousins is 6-0. We didn't lose a single game. Now, my little kids are getting pretty happy to wear a little happy tooth, and some of the other kids that call them tooth fairies are not doing that anymore. In fact, we were doing so well, one of the coaches came up to me and he said, Randy said, ain't no way that little ragtag group of kids you got can beat everybody. I said, how in the world did you do it? And I thought about a minute. I said, I didn't tell them that they couldn't win. In fact, I told them if they would come to practice, listen to me, give it their very best, that they would be winners. And they believed it. I'll never forget my little happy tooth game. We went on, we did lose one game later that year. We ended up 11-1 and won the league. And then the next year, I drafted pretty good, and we turned around and won the league again. And then there was no doubt in anybody's mind that we were winners. Now, I could tell you a lot of things about that little happy game group. And to this day, it's been about 35 years, there's still some of them that really stick in my memory. And I could tell you some stories about a number of them. I could tell you about Terry. Now, Terry was a special child. Terry was a foster child, and he only spent one year with us there. Terry always came to practice. Terry had a smile that reached from ear to ear and was always as happy as he could be. But the thing I remember most about Terry is not once, but twice during the course of the year, he decided to relieve himself while standing in the middle of center field. I mean, he didn't even turn his back to the stands. He just pulled his pants down around his knees and just hosed it off, and that's just the way it was. Now, Terry was a special child. Or I could tell you about Matthew. Now, Matthew was one of those kids that, he was one of my younger kids and didn't have a lot of skill, but boy, he wanted to play baseball. He'd do whatever you told him. He'd give it the biggest try you've ever seen. And lo and behold, we're playing a ball game, and in the middle of the ball game, there's a little pop-up hit to him. Matthew runs over to get it, and he's getting all ready to get it. He misjudged it. He hit him right in the mouth and knocked all 4 of his front teeth out. But you know what? He went over and picked up the ball and threw it in before he went over and picked up his teeth. He believed me when I told him, you got to get the ball back in a hurry. And you know what? It was pretty nice then to have a dentist as your sponsor too. But the one kid that I'm sure I will never, ever forget, I'm just going to call him T. Now, T was a little African-American boy. We didn't have a lot of African-Americans on the team or even in the league. And he came from a much more difficult environment than most of my kids did. T had it pretty rough. There was some instability in the family that he was in. There was a lot of poverty. It seemed like T just absolutely had no support at all. In fact, most of the time after practice and even after some of the games, nobody even came to pick him up. So Jess and I would load T up in the truck, and we'd take him home. And we did this just about after every practice. And we'd take him out there. T lived on the outside of Wetumpka there in an old farmhouse right next to a cornfield. And we would pull up in front of that house, and we'd let T out. And I don't think I ever saw him go to the door. T would run around and go through the window on the side of the house. Well, we had a good time with T. My team parents picked up and really helped him out a lot as we went along. And T was a really good kid. I was glad I got to know him. Well, just a few years after that, we moved away from Alabama and moved to Georgia. And about 20 years after we moved to Georgia, my wife and I were in Centennial Olympic Park in downtown Atlanta. And we were waiting to meet some friends to go eat dinner. And this really nice, dressed, good-looking young black lady came up to me and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Are you Mr. Nix, and did you used to live in Wetumpka, Alabama?" I said, "I did." And she motioned for this young man to come over, and I turned around, and I'm standing there looking at this boy. He's probably 6 feet tall or taller, very athletic, dressed really nice, looked like a picture of success. And he stuck out his hand and he said, "Mr. Nix, I'm T. Do you remember coaching me in baseball when I was 8 years old?" For somebody who likes to speak, I was absolutely speechless. In fact, I think there were some tears ran down my face as I gave him a big hug. And we talked for a while. As it turned out, T had turned out to be a very, very good athlete. And he had gotten a scholarship to play football at an outstanding university. But he had had a season-ending injury that had caused him to not be able to complete. But he was able to stay on as an student assistant and got his degree. And he was at that point in time working for a company in Atlanta as an IT specialist and doing extremely well. Well, we talked there for a few minutes, and finally when we had to go, I looked at him, I said, "T, you got to tell me something." He said, "What's that?" I said, "How in the world did you remember me after all these years?" And he said some words that almost will make tears come into my eyes right now. He said, "How could I ever forget my very first coach?" Well, now, I can't take credit for the success of any of those kids that I coached. But I will say this. You never know what a long-term difference, a little bit of time, a lot of love, a little motivation, and a few rides home after practice are going to make in the life of a kid. Sometimes all you got to do is show them what winning looks like, and they'll do the rest. And I have to tip my hat to my little Happy Tooth gang.
Thanks, Randy. I'm sure you made a lot of difference in a lot of people's lives, so appreciate that. Today's next storyteller has a lot of hats over the years: minister, teacher, youth leader, author, camp director, world traveler, especially to the Holy Land, and bargain hunter, and probably referee for the church potluck arguments. Mary Pat Spencer was born in Jacksonville, Florida. She earned degrees in religion and sociology. She was one of the first women ordained in her region. She co-pastored churches across the South with her husband Ed, who you met, and acquired a generation and inspired a generation of young people. Somewhere there, she raised 2 daughters, spoiled a few dogs, and mastered a spiritual gift of finding bargains. But though all these titles and accomplishments, Mary Pat is known best for her laughter, her stories, and her enormous heart.
How many of you, by the show of your hands, wait till I finish the question, have had a bad day, that bad day turned into the worst day as the day progressed? Show of hands. Wow. None of you, some of you haven't had a bad day. Well, I'm here to tell those who did honestly raise your hand and say, "I've had a bad day." I know what you're talking about. But I have good news for you. I found the cure for that. And it is this, if you want to take notes. Ready? When you're having a bad day and it gets worse every second of the day until you can't stand it any longer, here's the cure. Get up, get out, and go do something good for someone else. Now, I learned that at a very young age, and I've had to apply it more times than I would really like. And I was having one of those kind of days when we co-pastored in Sarasota, Florida. It's the kind of day where you wish you could get away and just have a good cry, but there's no time to squeeze it in. So it was then that I saw at the far end of my desk a note that had been sitting there for, well over a week, maybe 2. I had ignored this note because, well, I didn't know the person who had called it in. And besides, time had lapsed, so I figured, well, her request had already been met. No problem. I'll ignore it. But then my head started churning my cure, so I picked up the pink message slip. Remember those? Write the name, the time they called, what the concern was. Well, it was from a nearby nursing home. A lady had requested or called in and asked them to request that they would like to meet with a female clergy. Well, all kind of things went through my mind. First, did she have some concerns with male clergy? Or perhaps it was too private or personal, and she needed to speak with a female. And then I thought, well, maybe, what if she's dying? Or worse, already dead. So all those possibilities only added guilt to my already bad day. Great. So I took the slip and determined to use my own cure, got in the car and made my way to the nursing home. When I arrived, I parked the car, tried to shake off the day that had already been horrible, took a deep breath, blew it out, and with message in hand, made my way inside the nursing home. When I arrived at the desk, the lady at the desk said, who are you here for? And I said, Irene. And the lady at the desk looked at me as if to ask, are you sure you have the right person? But then she just shrugged her shoulders and pointed down the hall to the room as she gave me the room number. So I made my way down to Irene's room. When I arrived, there was only one person in the room, over by the window. She looked like she was asleep. So I said, oh, good, I'll just leave my card and phone number. But I knew in my heart that would not work. That was not what I was there for. So I walked over to Irene. And I said, Irene, I'm Mary Pat from Beneva Christian. And I understand you wanted to meet with a female clergy. Well, there was no response. So I thought, well, I'll look around the room and see if I can find something to talk about. So I picked up what appeared to be a family photo, and I said, Irene, is this a photo of your family? Well, at this point, I didn't know whether she'd had a stroke and really was trying to speak her words. So I went on to another object, and each time I mentioned something, like I commented on her flowers that were in her room, and also the beautiful handmade quilt that lay at the foot of her bed. And each time, Irene responded, oh, wow. Well, for the next 15, maybe a little bit longer, I tried to think of things that might spark her interest, or at least nod, and to let me know that she's okay. And so after about 15 minutes,
and no response. Nothing happened. I said, Irene, I have to go now. But before I go, would you like to have a prayer? I'm here to tell you, that lady sat up so quickly and opened her eyes as wide as they could be. And with a very clear and loud voice, she said, as long as you keep it short. Well, I laughed so hard. This took 15, 20 minutes to get to here. I laughed so hard that the nurse from the desk up front came to see if everything was okay. But I had one last question for Irene. Was that short enough? You see, it wasn't so much that Irene needed to meet with a female clergy. It's that this female clergy needed to meet Irene. Because I believe that God works through other people to bring us joy through the Holy Spirit when we need it most and probably least expect it. And then I realized that I left that nursing home that day full of joy, full of gratitude that I serve a God that has a wonderful sense of humor. Plus, I was thankful that I took my own advice, because I left that nursing home a better person, not only full of joy, but a great memory and a story to tell, of course, but also one I'll never forget. So when you're going through a bad time and you have one of those bad days that get worse as the day progresses, follow that advice. Get up, get out, and go do something for someone else. And I hope that you will meet your special Irene.
Our next storyteller spent most of his days doing things that sound like they belong in Netflix legal drama. Jess Nix is a top white-collar attorney. Now that sounds, we got a few other attorneys in here, white-collar attorney, so he gets all the white-collar cases, handles government investigations, criminal defense, appeals, and cases involving enough paperwork to run a herd of cattle. He's argued cases in federal court, worked alongside the Alabama Attorney General's office, helped prosecute political corruption cases, and texted legal battles involving billions of dollars. Jess has been recognized as one of Alabama's rising star attorneys, and though his family still asks him to fix the internet anytime it goes down. Today, we get to see the side of Jess that no one sees in the courtroom. Please welcome, as a storyteller, so please welcome attorney, strategist, and survivor of countless legal footnotes, Jess Nix.
Thank you. I am, in fact, Randy Nix's better-looking son. So, I brought 10 books on my honeymoon, and I read every one of them. And I'm going to tell you, this is not the start of some kind of Hallmark movie or some kind of twisted Lifetime movie. And it has a happy ending. My wife is right there, and our 4 kids. So apparently I figured out how to stop reading books at some point. But I had to, sometimes the story You get to choose it. Sometimes the event chooses a story, and sometimes fate chooses a story. So the story I'm going to tell you today, the main events of it took place 22 years ago this very day. So, my wife and I were high school sweethearts. We met on a blind date when I was 15 and she was 17. She needed a date to homecoming and I needed a car. So, we dated all through high school. We then went to Sanford together. That's how we got to Birmingham. We still live in Vestavia. We were engaged during our last year of college. I graduated in December, and so I worked December through the end of May. She finished up her degree, and we got married 2 weeks after she finished college. So we were, I was 22, she was 23. We were young. We'd never, really traveled anywhere together. This was a new thing for both of us. So we get married. We have a big wedding at First Methodist Church in LaGrange, Georgia. It's the kind of classic church with the center aisle. Beautiful wedding. We leave the ceremony to go to the reception, and we're the first ones out. So I basically run to the reception. She keeps up with me somehow in her dress because I wanted to get the first strawberry in the chocolate fountain, and I did. And that was about the only thing I got to eat that day because she and I made a mistake at that point. We went to greet the first people who came through the door. We did not want to do a receiving line. We wound up in a receiving line. And we received everyone who came to that wedding. And it was a couple of hundred people. And we didn't know it at the time, but the story turns on it. Apparently, a couple of them, when we shook their hands perhaps were not as clean as they should have been. Because they perhaps passed along something that we took with us. So, the reception ends, we go on a limo ride to Atlanta. There was lots of, rumors within the family of what took place in that limo ride. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what took place. She fell asleep on the actual seat. I fell asleep on the floor. That was everything that occurred in that limo ride. We were exhausted. So we go to Atlanta. We stay in the airport that's right by the Hartsfield Airport, sat out on the balcony, watched the planes take off. It was amazing. We brought food with us from the reception, so we finally got to eat it. It was Lebanese food. My wife is half Lebanese, so, we have a Lebanese feast. It's wonderful. Next morning, we get up early. We fly to St. Lucia. And like I said, this is like our first vacation together. We'd gone with, she'd been with my family, I'd been with her family, but this is the first time it's just the two of us. When we get to St. Lucia, you have to take a bus from the airport over the middle of St. Lucia. It's a long ride. It's, you don't feel very well at the end, but we get out, we go, and they hand us some fruity drink. It's mid-afternoon. We get the tour. We go around St. Lucia. We go and have dinner that night. We have an Italian dinner at one of the restaurants, right? Because St. Lucia, we stayed at the Sandals Resort. It's all-inclusive. Everything's included. So we go and we have this great Italian dinner. This is Saturday night, May the 30th, right? Everything's going great. And then we go to bed. At about 12:30, I'm awoken. And I'm not exactly sure how I was awoken, whether she said something to me or I just heard her, because she was in the bathroom, and she was in intestinal distress. That's the polite way of putting it. And she would be in that intestinal distress for 5 straight days. So we had apparently brought something with us from that receiving line. So if you want a tip, don't have a receiving line at your wedding. That's just my next wedding. I won't. Sorry, I didn't mean that. But this was probably the worst stomach virus she may have ever had. Because this wasn't one like you eat and then, a little while later you get sick. This was, she could drink a glass of water and she would be sprinting to get to the bathroom. She was a trooper, and she wants me to tell you this. She was a trooper because, there were things to do at the resort, and she would come with me, and she was pale. She didn't feel good, but, we played the lawn croquet. we went and got in the ocean. It's a really cool resort in that one side of it is the Atlantic, and the other side is the Caribbean. So it's actually really unique. You can actually stand in one place and have a picture made where you're splitting the two oceans, right? Very cool, very interesting. She felt absolutely terrible. So what did I do? I read books. I read a lot of books. And this wasn't like, you may be thinking, oh, we took tiny books. No, I took things like, if you've read The Guns of August about World War I, great book. It was either Evidence That Demands a Verdict or The Case for Christ. I had a John Grisham. So I had all these books, and I am reading them. So there's a few pictures, like Sarah's sitting or coming out on the balcony, and I'm in the pool, sitting by the pool reading a book. Or I'm sitting in a chair while Sarah's laying in the bed looking like she would rather be anywhere else in the world reading a book. She actually brought out the picture album today, earlier, so that I could prepare for this. And sure enough, I'm reading a book in like 5 different pictures. And it's a different book, right? So she gets to feeling better on about, I want to say Thursday. And the resort we stayed at is right beside the biggest mountain in St. Lucia. It's about 2,600 feet high, and the whole island's at sea level. And you can climb it, right? And this is not like a paved path. You've got to make your way up to the top of the mountain. So we go up, and she is trooper. She is pale. She doesn't feel well. We go all the way to the top of the mountain. There's an old fort up there. I can't remember what country built it, but on a clear day you can see Martinique. And so we could see Martinique. And it was beautiful and magical. And we come back down and we go and we're excited, right? Because she finally feels better. And we've got a day left, right? So it's Friday, we fly back, or it's Thursday, we fly back on Saturday, I think. We've got Friday. It's wonderful. So she feels better. Then we go to bed, we get up the next morning, she feels great, and I'm sick. And unlike her, I was not a trooper. I laid in the bed and I didn't move because I was deathly afraid that I was going to be sick on that airplane, right? If I was going to be as sick as her, I wasn't getting on that airplane. I don't know where they were going to put me, but they were going to put me somewhere, right? And I'll give you this other tip about all-inclusive resort. So early on when she was sick, we went and saw the nurse, right? And the nurse basically said, I'm so sorry you feel bad. I can't do anything for you. So she was nice enough to prescribe chicken noodle soup that was special ordered to our room. So that's what she got. Not sure if it made any difference, but that's what she got. We also found out this. We asked the nurse, can you give her any medicine? She said, no, but you can go to the gift shop. So we went to the gift shop. And the gift shop has Pepto-Bismol. And it is not all-inclusive on Pepto-Bismol. In 2004, it was $20 for a bottle of Pepto-Bismol that small. I looked up today, that is about $36. So all-inclusive resorts don't include Pepto. But I laid in that bed all day, and I didn't move. And I felt terrible. And by the end of the day, I felt a little better. So Sarah ordered us a feast for our final day right before we got on the airplane. Right? She ordered, we had eggs and bacon and cereal and just all this stuff because we hadn't been able to eat all week. We were so excited. And there's a picture in our wedding album of this huge feast on the last day when we're about to fly back. And do you know what was eaten off that? 1 box of cereal. I don't know who they gave the feast to, but it wasn't to us because we couldn't eat it. Now, I'm happy to say we did make it back. I was able to fly on that plane. I didn't feel great, but I didn't get sick. And so, for all of you wondering, my advice on how to travel internationally, number 1, bring as many books as you can fit because you never know when you might need them. Number 2, even if you go to an all-inclusive resort, don't forget your Pepto-Bismol.
Thank you. That was great. And I've had a little experience with that Montezuma's Revenge, we call it. So anyway, it's been a good day, and I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up now, and I want to thank all of our speakers. Would all the speakers stand up and give them a big hand? You know, hopefully this will be first storytelling adventure among several. We're going to try to have these periodically and hopefully build it into something bigger if we can, if we get some funding. But anyway, hope y'all had a good time. I did. And just feel free to mingle around and have a cookie or whatever and talk to each other. And we'll hopefully see you again soon. I appreciate you coming out.